He had stopped by the small general store, only because he needed a few everyday items, nothing special. The place was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet where you can hear the soft hum of the old fridge in the corner and the rustle of a paper bag every time someone touches the counter. He liked that calmness. After a long day, silence felt like a soft blanket. The girl at the counter was someone he had seen many times, but he had never really paid much attention to her. She was always there leaning slightly forward, scanning items, her hair tied loosely as if she had put it up in a hurry. She wasn't the kind of person who talked much. She stayed focused, never raising her voice, never complaining, just doing her job with the quiet patience that most people didn't notice. He placed his items on the counterbread, a bottle of water, a small packet of tea. She scanned them one by one, her movements careful and almost gentle, as if she didn't want to disturb anyone around. When she slid the last item across the scanner, she placed everything in a thin plastic bag and pushed it toward him. He smiled without thinking and said, "Thanks, dear." The words slipped out naturally, the way someone says bro, boss, or buddy without attaching any heavy meaning. It was just a soft, harmless word. But the moment it left his mouth, he noticed something strange. She froze. Her hand stopped halfway as she was pulling the receipt. Her eyes lifted slowly toward him, almost like she wasn't sure if she heard him correctly. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The air between them suddenly felt heavier, as if time had paused. He didn't understand why a single word caused such a reaction. For a second, he wondered if he had said something wrong. Maybe she didn't like being called that. Maybe she thought he was being too familiar. He almost opened his mouth to explain, but before he could say anything, she lowered her gaze and quietly said, "You're welcome." Her voice was so soft, it almost faded into the background noise. He picked up the bag, nodded politely, and walked out of the store. But the moment he stepped into the open air, the scene replayed in his mind. Her reaction wasn't annoyance. It wasn't anger. It looked more like surprise. A deep, unexpected kind of surprise. The sort of reaction a person gives when something touches a place inside them they don't often show. As he walked to his car, he kept thinking about her expression. The way her eyes widened just a little. The way she froze mid-movement. The way her voice trembled, though she tried hard to hide it. He sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine. Why did that simple word affect her like that? He shrugged it off at first. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she had a long day. Everyone has moments when their mind drifts somewhere else. Still, the thought stayed with him longer than he expected. That evening, as he made tea, the memory came back again. He could almost see her face as clearly as if she were standing in front of him. There were people in the world who grew up hearing kindness every day. And there were people who didn't. People who heard soft words so rarely that when someone finally said one, it felt strange, almost unreal. He wondered which kind she was. The next morning, he tried to forget about it. He got ready for work, checked his messages, and drove through traffic like everyone else. But even with all the noise around him, his mind drifted to her again. He knew nothing about her, except the little he had observed: the quiet behavior, the gentle movements, the way she never looked anyone directly in the eyes for too long. People like her weren't used to being seen. They moved like shadows, doing their work silently, while most customers barely acknowledged them. Maybe calling her dear wasn't a big deal to him, but maybe to her. Maybe it was. Later that day, he stopped by the store again, not because he needed anything urgent, but because something inside him wanted to understand that moment a little better. He told himself he needed more tea, but he knew he just wanted to see if her reaction was the same. When he entered, one of her coworkers was at the counter. She was nowhere to be seen. He walked around the aisles slowly, pretending to browse. Eventually, he spotted her restocking shelves at the back. She moved with the same quiet patience as always, her expression calm but distant. He didn't want to stare, so he picked up a small packet of rice and headed to the counter. Her coworker scanned it quickly, making a small joke about the slow afternoon. He smiled politely, but his attention was in the back where she stood. He didn't see her face again that day, but part of him felt relieved. Maybe things were normal again. Maybe she didn't think much of it. Maybe he was overthinking everything. But that night, as he lay in bed, the same moment replayed in his mind for the third time. He remembered how she held her breath for half a second when he spoke. He remembered how her fingers trembled slightly when she handed over the receipt. It wasn't anger. It was something else, something deeper. Maybe she wasn't used to people speaking gently to her. Maybe she had been treated like she didn't matter. Maybe life had made her feel invisible. And kindness, especially unexpected kindness, felt foreign, almost unbelievable. He didn't know her story, but he could feel something in that reaction. It stirred a quiet curiosity inside him, the kind that doesn't fade easily. The next few days were busy for him, but the thought lingered in the back of his mind like a soft echo he couldn't ignore. When he finally returned to the store again, she was back at the counter. She was ringing up someone else's items when he entered. She glanced at the door out of habit, and the moment she recognized him, her eyes moved away quickly, almost shyly. Not scared, not uncomfortable, just a little unsure. He picked a few things and stepped in line behind another customer. As he waited, he noticed how she kept her voice low, how she handled each item carefully, how she avoided eye contact not out of rudeness, but out of habit. It made him wonder how often anyone truly noticed her. When it was finally his turn, she greeted him with a small nod, not lifting her head fully. He placed the items on the counter. Her hands moved fast, as if she wanted to finish quickly without drawing attention. He wanted to say something, but his mind went blank for a moment. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable again. When she finished scanning everything, she pushed the bag toward him. He took a slow breath, wanting to choose his words carefully. He didn't want to repeat the same term in case it made her uneasy again. So this time, he simply smiled and said softly, "Thank you." She looked up. Just a quick glance, but enough to see something had changed. Her expression wasn't startled this time. It was calmer, almost relieved. She whispered, "You're welcome," in a voice slightly steadier than before. He walked out with a small sense of warmth spreading through his chest. Not happiness exactly, but something gentle like the feeling you get when you've stepped into a story without meaning to. A story you don't fully understand yet. That night, he thought about her again. He thought about how some people carry heavy stories behind quiet faces. How sometimes the smallest words leave the biggest marks. And how, without realizing it, he had stepped into a moment that meant more than he expected. He didn't know what part 2 of this story would look like yet. But something told him this wasn't the end. Sometimes a simple thanks, dear, is not just a word. It's the beginning of something that changes 2 lives in ways neither person sees coming. For the next few days, life moved normally for him, but something subtle had changed in the way he noticed things. He still went to work, still followed his usual routines, but every time he passed near that store, a small part of him wondered how she was doing. It was strange, because he had never been the kind of person who paid much attention to strangers. But that one unexpected moment, her freezing at a single gentle word, kept returning to his mind again and again. When someone's reaction stays with you longer than it should, it means something inside you is trying to understand it. One late afternoon, he walked toward the store again. He told himself he needed cooking oil and batteries, but he knew the truth. He wanted to observe her a little more. Not out of curiosity in the wrong way, but from a place of concern. He didn't know how to explain Dot as soon as he stepped inside. He saw her at the far corner, organizing boxes. She was alone, stacking items neatly on the shelf. Her movements were careful as always, but he noticed something else. She kept adjusting the sleeve of her shirt again and again, almost like a nervous habit. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to make him wonder. He walked slowly through the aisles, pretending to browse. She didn't notice him at first, or maybe she did, but avoided looking directly. When she finally turned to grab something from the lower shelf, she saw him standing a few steps away. For half a second, her eyes met his. She quickly looked away, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. He didn't say anything. He didn't want to startle her. Instead, he picked up a few items and carried them to the counter. The same coworker from before scanned his items while she continued working in the background. But even from that distance, he could sense something quiet around her, something like a feeling she carried everywhere she went. After paying, he walked out with his bag, but instead of going home immediately, he paused outside for a few seconds. Through the glass window, he saw her return to the counter, her face calm, but her shoulders slightly tense. That small detail stayed with him. The next day he passed by again, but this time he didn't go inside. He simply walked past the storefront and saw her through the window. She was helping an elderly customer, holding a packet of biscuits for him since he couldn't reach the counter properly. Her voice was polite, steady, but distant. Even when the old man smiled at her, she gave only a very small smile in return. Not rude, just faint. Like she didn't know how to give more. He stood there for a moment longer than he meant to. And that's when he realized something. She never really smiled fully at anyone. Not even a little. She seemed like someone who had learned to hide parts of herself so deeply that even basic warmth felt unfamiliar. As he walked away, a question formed slowly in his mind. What kind of life makes someone react to kindness like it's something rare? He didn't know, but he wanted to understand more. A few days later, he finally went back inside. She was at the counter again. It wasn't very busy that evening. A couple of customers left just as he walked in. For the first time, she looked directly at him without immediately looking away. It wasn't long, just 1 second, but enough for him to feel a small shift. Maybe she remembered him. Maybe she had been wondering too. He placed his items on the counter. She scanned them quietly. He didn't want to make things awkward, so he kept his tone relaxed. "Long day?" he asked softly. She paused, blinked once, then nodded. "A bit." Her voice was low, with a slight roughness that suggested she didn't talk much during the day. But she didn't seem bothered by his question. In fact, she seemed almost surprised that he asked. He paid and stepped aside to let someone behind him take their turn. But instead of leaving immediately, he pretended to look at the small stands near the exit: chocolates, gum, batteries, anything that let him stay a few more seconds. He heard her laugh quietly at something the next customer said. It wasn't a big laugh, but it was different from before. Softer, almost shy. He looked back for a moment and saw her covering her mouth slightly, as if unsure whether she was allowed to laugh. He walked out with a small smile on his face. Something was changing. Slowly but surely. Days passed, and he kept dropping by whenever he could. Sometimes he bought only one thing: a bottle of water, a pack of bread, just to have a reason to talk to her. He didn't want to seem strange, so he always kept the conversation simple. "How's your day?" "Busy today?" "Looks like you're working late again." She never opened up fully, but she started speaking more than before. Her answers became a little longer, her voice more steady, her eyes lifted a little more often. One evening, when the store was almost empty, he noticed her wiping the counter slowly. She looked tired, her shoulders drooped, her steps slow. He walked up with a bag of flour and placed it down. "You seem tired today," he said softly. She looked at him for a second, as if debating whether to answer honestly. Then she said, "Just a lot on my mind. Hope everything's okay." He said. She hesitated. "It will be." It wasn't a full explanation, but it was the first time she responded in a way that revealed even a little of her inner world. He walked out feeling a strange mix of worry and connection. She wasn't just quiet. She wasn't just shy. She was someone carrying more than she allowed anyone to see. A few days later, he came in during a rush hour. People were lined up, talking loudly, dropping coins, complaining about prices. She was managing the counter alone, while her coworker was restocking. She kept her expression calm, but her hands moved a little too fast, a little too nervously. Someone in the line snapped impatiently, "Can you hurry up?" She nodded quickly, apologizing even though she had done nothing wrong. He felt something twist inside his chest. Nobody deserved to be spoken to like that, especially someone who always treated others politely. When it was finally his turn, she recognized him, and her shoulders relaxed slightly. Her voice softened. "Sorry for the wait," she whispered. "You handled it well," he said quietly. "You're doing a good job." She stopped for a moment, not sure how to react. Her eyes lowered, and for the first time, he saw something like emotion flicker across her face. Not disappointment, not stress, but something like gratitude. "Thank you," she said. And this time her voice carried a gentler tone. After he left, he thought about her more deeply. She wasn't just a quiet girl working in a store. She was someone who had learned to move silently through life, someone who rarely received appreciation or softness. Maybe she lived alone. Maybe she didn't have anyone who talked to her kindly. Maybe life had taught her not to expect gentle words. He didn't know her story yet, but he could see enough to understand her reaction that first day. The way she froze. The way her eyes widened. The way her voice trembled. She wasn't shocked because the word dear was unusual. She was shocked because kindness was unusual. And that realization stayed with him long after the sun set and the city lights began to glow. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: he didn't want this quiet connection to disappear. He wanted to understand her more, even if it took time. Some people walked into your life with noise and drama. She walked into his quietly, almost silently. But somehow, her silence was the loudest thing he had heard in a long time, and that made him want to stay a little longer. Over the next few weeks, something small but meaningful began to change between them. It wasn't something big or sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, like sunlight quietly filling a room 1 inch at a time. Every time he visited the store, she seemed just a little more open, a little more comfortable, a little less guarded. He didn't try to push anything. He didn't want to step into her space too fast. Instead, he let every moment come naturally. If she wanted to talk, he listened. If she seemed tired, he didn't force conversation. His presence slowly became something familiar to her, something safe, something she wasn't used to, but didn't want to lose. One evening, the store was unusually quiet. The sky outside had a soft orange color, and the streets were almost empty. He stepped inside and noticed she was alone at the counter. She looked up, and for the first time, she gave him a small, genuine smile. Not a polite customer service smile. Not a forced smile. A real one, even if it was small. "You're here early today," she said softly. "Finished work sooner than I expected," he replied. "Thought I'd pick up a few things." She nodded and started scanning his items. It felt different. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was calm, like two people standing near each other without needing to fill every second with words. While she packed his items, he asked gently, "How have you been?" She paused slightly, then said, "Better." He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what had changed. He just nodded and let her take the lead. People opened up when they felt safe, not when they were questioned. When he turned to leave, she suddenly said, "Wait." He looked back. She wasn't looking at him directly, but she was holding the edge of the counter nervously. "You always ask how I am," she said quietly. "Most people don't." He could hear the emotion hidden in her voice, even though she tried to keep it steady. "I ask because I care," he replied simply. She lowered her head slightly, and he sensed she wasn't used to hearing things like that. Not in real life. Not from people she barely knew. But he wasn't a stranger anymore, not to her. The next day, when he entered the store again, something new happened. She actually initiated the conversation before he said anything. "How was your day?" she asked with a little hesitance, but also a bit of courage. He smiled. "Busy, but okay." She nodded, looking relieved, almost happy that she had asked. As days passed, their conversations slowly grew longer. Sometimes only a minute. Sometimes 2. Some days she spoke more, some days less. But each time, she let him see a small piece of who she really was. One evening, when the rain was falling softly outside, she seemed quieter than usual. Not in her normal way. This was a different kind of quiet. A heavy one. When he placed his items on the counter, he noticed she kept rubbing her hands together like she was trying to stay calm. "You all right?" he asked gently. She looked down and gave a tiny nod, but it wasn't convincing. "You can tell me if something's wrong," he added softly. "You don't have to hide it." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. For a moment, she didn't speak at all. He thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she said, in a very low voice, "Sometimes things get overwhelming." He waited. He didn't interrupt. She took a small breath. "Life gets heavy, and I don't always know how to deal with it." He could hear the truth in her words. She wasn't talking about one bad day. She was talking about life, about years of being alone, carrying everything on her own shoulders. "That must feel really hard," he said. "But you're stronger than you think." She looked up quickly, almost as if she wanted to believe him but didn't know how. "No one ever says things like that to me," she whispered. "Well," he said gently, "maybe they should have." For a moment, she closed her eyes, as if holding back emotions she didn't want to show publicly. He didn't say more. Sometimes silence is the kindest thing you can offer. When he left the store that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. She wasn't just quiet or shy. She was someone who had taught herself not to expect support from anyone. Someone who had learned to keep everything inside because she didn't trust the world to hold her feelings gently. The next time he visited, he found her sitting on a small stool behind the counter, rubbing her forehead like she had a headache. She stood up quickly when she saw him, as if trying to appear normal. "You don't have to get up," he said softly. "You look tired." She shook her head. "Just a long day. Want some water?" he asked. She hesitated, but then nodded. He grabbed a bottle from the fridge and placed it on the counter. When she reached for it, her hand lightly brushed his. She pulled her hand back quickly, almost panicked, as if she had done something wrong. "It's okay," he said with a soft smile. "Relax." She looked embarrassed, but also touched by his tone. Simple gestures, kindness, patience, understanding, were still new to her. A few days later, she surprised him again. He entered the store on a busy afternoon, and she actually waved at him. The wave was tiny, almost shy, but it happened. It was enough to show how much she had changed since the first day. He waved back. Feeling a warmth inside his chest, he couldn't explain that as he walked to the counter. He overheard one of her coworkers talking to a delivery guy. "She's been different lately," the coworker said quietly. "A bit more cheerful. Smiling more." He felt something shift in him. Not pride, just a gentle happiness knowing he had played even a small part in making her days lighter. When he reached the counter, she looked up at him with a softness he had never seen in her eyes before. There was something new there, trust, maybe. Or comfort. Or both. "You look happier today," he said. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm trying." "That's enough," he replied. "Trying is more than enough." She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. Their connection began to grow in small ways. Some days he stayed longer to help her carry heavy boxes when the store wasn't busy. She always protested at first, afraid of bothering him, but he insisted, and eventually she accepted his help without arguing. Some days she told him tiny pieces of her life. Nothing too personal, but enough to show she trusted him more than before. "I didn't have many people to talk to," she said one evening. "So I stopped trying." "You don't have to stop anymore," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, a slow, meaningful nod that felt like a promise. On another day, she told him she liked drawing but hadn't done it in years. "No time," she said. "No energy." "You should start again," he encouraged. She looked surprised. "Why?" "Because it's something you loved," he answered. "And you deserve things that make you feel alive." She didn't reply, but he saw how her eyes softened, as if someone had finally reminded her that she mattered too. One late evening, when the store was almost empty and the quietness felt warm like a blanket, she said something that stayed with him long after he left. "You know, I feel safe when you're around," she whispered. He didn't know how to respond at first. No one had ever said that to him before, not in that tone, not with that kind of honesty. "I'm glad," he said finally, "because you're safe with me." She didn't speak after that. She just looked down, but he saw a faint smile appear on her lips. A real one. A peaceful one. Slowly, she was opening up. Slowly, she was letting him into a world she had kept locked for years. She wasn't fully healed. She wasn't suddenly confident. But she was changing, becoming a little braver, a little lighter, a little more hopeful each day. A connection was forming between them, real, gentle, and unforced. Something that didn't need dramatic words or big gestures. Something built from quiet moments, soft conversations, and the simple act of showing up. He didn't know where this path would lead. He didn't know how her story had begun. But he knew one thing for certain. He wanted to be part of whatever came next, not to save her, not to change her, just to be there with her, beside her, as she found the parts of herself she had forgotten. And she, slowly, was beginning to believe she deserved that. The days kept passing, and what started as small, simple conversations slowly began turning into something deeper, something that didn't need to be defined, but could be felt. Their bond wasn't built through loud moments or dramatic gestures. It was built through quiet exchanges, gentle words, and the simple comfort of knowing someone finally saw you, truly saw you, without judgment. He didn't plan anything. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't push her to open up faster than she wanted to. He simply continued being there, whether for a minute or 5, each visit adding a new layer of trust between them. One evening, the sky outside was turning a soft shade of blue, and the store was almost empty. When he walked in, he saw her sitting behind the counter, writing something in a small notebook. Her hair fell slightly over her face, and she kept brushing it aside as she wrote. She looked calm, almost peaceful. When she noticed him, she quickly closed the notebook, as if it were something personal. "You're writing something?" he asked gently. She hesitated, but nodded. "Just thoughts." He didn't ask to see it. He didn't make her uncomfortable. Instead, he smiled softly and said, "That's good. Writing helps." Her eyes met his, and she seemed relieved that he didn't push for more. He picked up a few small items and placed them on the counter. As she scanned them, she said something unexpected. "You remember the first day you called me dear?" He nodded slowly. "Of course." She lowered her head a little, as if gathering courage. "That day, I froze because no one had said anything like that to me in a long time." He stayed quiet, letting her continue at her own pace. "It wasn't the word," she said quietly. "It was the tone. It was gentle. It felt strange, because I wasn't used to anyone speaking to me like that." He felt a small ache in his chest, not pity, not sadness, but a tenderness toward the life she must have lived. She continued, "Most people talk to me only when they need something, or when they're annoyed. So when you said that, I didn't know how to react." "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said softly. "You didn't," she replied quickly. "You surprised me, but in a good way." For a moment, they just looked at each other, and in that silence, something shifted again, like the last missing piece of a puzzle quietly falling into place. Later that week, he visited the store on a cold evening. She was standing near the entrance, holding a broom. It looked like she was closing the store. When she saw him, her face brightened, but she also looked confused. "You're here late," she said. "Just passing by," he replied. "Thought I'd say hi." She leaned the broom against the wall, and for the first time, stepped outside with him instead of staying behind the counter. The air was cool, but her presence made the moment warm in a quiet way. They walked a few steps away from the entrance. The street was quiet, with only a few cars passing by. She kept her arms folded, not from cold but from habit. He noticed how she always held herself in small, protective ways, like someone who had lived too long without comfort. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Anything. Why do you come here so often?" "It can't just be for the items." He wasn't shocked. She was finally brave enough to ask what she had been thinking for weeks. "I like talking to you," he answered honestly. "You're someone I don't want to lose connection with." She looked at him, her eyes soft but filled with an emotion she was trying hard to hide. "No one says things like that to me," she whispered. "Maybe they should start," he said with a small smile. She didn't smile back right away. Instead, she let his words sink in slowly, like they were something precious she wasn't used to receiving. A small moment passed before she said quietly, "Sometimes I feel invisible." "You're not invisible to me," he said gently. She looked away, but not out of discomfort, more out of emotion she wasn't sure how to express. They walked back to the entrance, and she picked up the broom again. He watched her carefully sweep the floor, making sure every corner was clean. She did everything with care, even tasks people usually overlooked. It showed who she was deep down, someone who gave effort even when no one appreciated it. After a few minutes, she said, "I used to think people didn't care about me because I wasn't interesting enough." "That's not true," he said. "People don't see you because they don't look. But I look, and you're more interesting than you think." She paused, gripping the broom handle a little tighter. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." Time continued passing like this, small conversations, gentle steps forward, small confessions shared under soft lights. She began opening up more, telling him about little pieces of her life. Not everything, not the deepest parts, but enough to show she trusted him in a way she didn't trust many people. One evening, when he entered the store, he found her fixing a shelf. She stood on a small stool, reaching for the top row. When she stepped down, she nearly slipped, and he instinctively reached out to steady her. His hand rested lightly on her arm. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded quickly, but her cheeks turned a soft shade of pink. She wasn't used to being held, even for a second. She wasn't used to someone caring enough to reach out. "Thank you," she murmured, Always, he said. Another time, he brought her a small chocolate bar. Nothing expensive, nothing special. Just something simple. You brought this for me? She asked, almost surprised. I thought you might like something sweet. She held the chocolate like it was something rare, something fragile. No one brings me gifts, she whispered. It's not a gift, he said. Just a small treat. Still, she said softly, it means more than you think. He noticed how she always held on to small acts of kindness like they were treasures. She didn't take anything for granted. That made him want to be gentler with her. One night, as the store was closing and they stood near the door in the dim light, she finally told him the truth behind the moment that started everything. That day, she began, when you said, thanks, dear, I froze because it reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a long time. What was that? He asked quietly. Warmth, she whispered. Someone seeing me as a person, not just someone behind a counter. He felt a small rush of emotion, not sadness, but a quiet understanding. She had lived in a world where soft words were rare, where affection was unfamiliar, where kindness felt like a surprise instead of a normal part of life. You deserve warmth, he said softly. From everyone. No, she said, shaking her head slightly. I deserve it from the right people. And you feel like one of them. The honesty in her voice stunned him for a moment. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply speaking from a place she had never opened before. He stepped a little closer, not too close, just enough to show he wasn't going anywhere. I'm glad I said it that day, he said. Not because I meant anything big by it, but because it brought me here, to you. She looked down, smiling slowly, a smile filled with warmth she had been afraid to show for so long. You've changed my days, she whispered. I don't feel as alone anymore. And you've changed mine, he replied. For a moment, the world around them felt quiet and small, like only the two of them existed. She wasn't the same girl who froze at a simple, gentle word. She wasn't the same person who avoided eye contact or hid behind silence. She had opened up. She had learned to trust again. She had started believing in warmth and kindness. As they stood there, she said something that made his heart soften in a way he didn't expect. Say it again, she murmured shyly. He knew what she meant. He smiled softly and said, in the same gentle tone as the first day, thanks, dear. This time, she didn't freeze. She didn't look away. She simply smiled fully, beautifully, openly. A smile that showed how far she had come. And in that small, quiet moment, their story felt complete, not because it was ending, but because something new was beginning.